Hello, everybody, and welcome to another wonderful EHN Canada webinar. My name is Jonathan Friedman, and I'm pleased to welcome you to today's webinar on What's Wrong with My Teen? For those of you who are long-standing attendees of our webinars, welcome back. For those of you who are new to EHN Canada and EHN Guardians, we are a leading nationwide network of treatment centers for addiction, trauma, and mental health. We offer inpatient services with centers coast to coast, just like our audience, as well as intensive outpatient and virtual options. For more information, visit our website at ehncanada.com or ehnguardians.ca. We're going to link those in the chat shortly. Everyone is on mute and cameras are turned off for today's webinar, but we'd love for you to use the Q&A box to submit your questions for our speakers throughout the session. Sometimes the Q&A box doesn't work. I'm personally going to be keeping track of the questions, so whether it's the Q&A or the chat, we're excited to answer your questions in the Q&A at the end of the session. We will be sending a follow-up email in the next week that will contain a link to the recording of today's sessions and your CE certificate. To stay updated on our future webinars and newsletters, we invite you to opt into our mailing list by filling out the form that has been linked in the Q&A chat. We are all located in Toronto, which is on the traditional territory of several nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. It's covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. If you are new to this work and want to find out whose land you are on or grew up on, please visit www.nativeland.ca. Now, allow me to introduce our host and our speaker for today. First, Colette Currin is the Vice President of EHN Guardians, where she leads national partnerships and develops innovative treatment solutions for military personnel, veterans, and first responders. Colette is also a registered psychotherapist holding a Master of Arts in Counseling Psychology and a Canadian Certified Addiction Counselor. Her unique strength lies in combining the clinical insight with decades of executive leadership in the corporate world, as well as her own lived experience. Her ability to bridge strategic vision with compassionate care has been instrumental in shaping specialized programs that address trauma, moral injury, and recovery within Canada's Guardians communities. And now, Susan Raphael is an addiction and mental health clinician and the founder of Sustainable Recovery Counselling Services in Toronto. She specializes in supporting teens, young adults, and families navigating addiction and recovery. Susan combines professional expertise with lived experience. She is a referral clinician with the NBA and NBPA Clinicians Network and internationally certified by the Canadian Addiction Counselor Certification Federation, or CACCF. Recently, she presented at the Ontario School Counselors Association Fall Conference, has been featured on the Ben Mulroney Show, Recovering Out Loud, and Mental Health Research Canada. We have a great webinar. We have a great group today. Colette, Susan, I'll hand over the stage to you.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Oh, Susan and I are very much looking forward to this.
Likewise.
Conversation. And Susan, I'm going to, start by saying I just wanted to add, having read your phenomenal book, which is going to be so important in our society, and kind of reflecting on the idea as a parent myself, that expression, we're only as happy as our unhappiest child, and the work I do in the Guardians portfolio, how much I see that emphasis falling on man. Oh man, is there a gap with regard to how we take care of families? And then when we talk to families, one of the biggest pain points is when children are not doing okay, whatever age they are, and they begin that acting out and so on. And so this conversation could not be more important, because I think when we look at treatment for whoever we're taking care of, we really do need to explore it in that holistic sense. Your book just is phenomenal, and I want to echo the sentiments of your friend and colleague, Dr. Erin Mantis, just with regard to our relationship, as colleagues for a long time, but also, the friendship that I hold very dear, and the firsthand ability I've had to experience the way that you support and uplift others, your unquenchable thirst for ongoing knowledge and education and so on, which has often spurred me on to kind of, read this book, go to this conference and so on. So I'm so looking forward to our conversation today. And, before I go on and on too much, let's dive right in, because we want to hear from you.
Thanks so much, Colette.
Yeah, no, thank you for being here. We know you're really busy, with a lot of conversations around this book. And so we appreciate you taking the time. Yeah.
Yes, my pleasure.
So Susan, I thought I'd, maybe just kick off with asking the question, like, what do you think is the biggest myth that parents believe when it comes to like, how's my teen doing?
It's a great question, and I do get asked this a lot. And there are many myths that I go over in my material, in my guide for transforming families, my book, What's Wrong with My Teen, that it's not going to happen to my child. And even when it is happening to their teen, there can be a denial that it's substance use disorder happening, addiction happening. There tends to be a preference that it's a mental health challenge rather than addiction. So there's still that stigma and the barriers around addiction. And what we have to remember, in your introduction addressed that well, is that substance use disorders and mental health disorders, of which addiction is one, are family disorders. They affect the whole family. And so parents need to be aware of, not have blinders on. And that's a lot of the parent work, is if they're coming to me or if they're coming to an organization that's referring them to me, they're willing to look at this. So that's excellent. But yeah, addiction can affect anyone. Doesn't matter where you're from. It doesn't matter how much money you have or how successful your parents are or you are. Lots of overachievers get substance involved. So it really doesn't matter. And some of the most dangerous words are, it's just a phase. We live in a society where one pill can kill. We have a lot of access to substances that we didn't have before for teenagers. So it is, I'm not an alarmist, but it is concerning, and we need to pay attention to the concerns of the day.
Well, thank you for that. And, I love what you're saying about, like, first this idea of this couldn't possibly happen to us. And then if it is happening, it's this, you talk in your book too about sort of the roles, that different family members
roles,
take. And maybe this idea of scapegoating is that, and if it is, it's just some problem. And then, as you say, and probably just a phase, as opposed to actually, this might be the canary in the coal mine, that the system right now is not working, because it's sure an indication. I know you'll get into that this person is struggling, is what it's saying,
Yeah, and behaviors tell us a story. So rather than judging or scapegoating the one who is perhaps acting out the story, looking at why is it happening and what's happening to my teen rather than what's wrong with my teen. And that's the shift that I make in my book too. It's not so much what's wrong, it's what's happening. And let's understand what's happening and validate what's happening so that we stay in reality. We might not like what's happening. That's entirely a different part. But we need to be willing to look at what's happening clearly.
What's happening as a starting place. Yeah. And that kind of leads me to the next question I wanted to ask Susan, which is then when we maybe do say, all right, something's going on, there's that tendency to want to fix, is sort of, again, it's like the focus and, being on that one individual and particularly if there's a crisis, situation that happens. And why is that not, why does that backfire sometimes, that kind of let me fix you strategy?
Well, the tendency to fix, I think a lot of us have that. We often don't communicate just for the sake of communicating. We're looking to problem solve. We're looking to use our rational brain and look for a problem and solve it. And parents are used to doing that with their children because they've had to do that when they were little. They had to look both ways before they took their child's hand and crossed the street. But when we're still trying to solve at a stage of development like teenagers, it's we're overstepping because it's their time to discover the solutions that work for them. And again, we don't have to like it or agree with it, but we do have to let them struggle. And parents and caregivers are the safety net that when they stumble, they're there to ask for help. They're there for support. So that's our tendency towards fixing.
Yeah.
And addiction is something that we can't control. And substance use disorder is something we can't control. Others can't control it. Only the individual can make the changes, but we can certainly influence change. We can contribute to influencing change. So and here's the thing, the child's brain is not developed. The teen's brain is developing. So they're supposed to be taking risks. They're supposed to be taking on more than they can handle, or they're supposed to be engaged in higher risk behaviors. But parents want to step in and interrupt that natural learning cycle. And I get it. I just said one pill can kill. Of course, parents are going to be on the forefront of stopping the consequence from happening or wanting to. But the teens really do need to have that learning. And it can backfire because if they don't have that learning, they may take a more serious risk because they haven't learned from the less serious risks. So the backfire could be that they get into more trouble because they haven't been consequenced naturally along the way. Does that make sense?
This idea of natural consequences, I actually feel I want to dig into that a little bit more. But I love what you're saying, Susan, because the two key takeaways that I'm hearing are, if we can really kind of be brave enough to take a step back and to look at the behavior that's going on in the context of learning and figuring out how to deal with feelings and, society and relationships out there and all that kind of thing, is that it may not be the best choices that are being made, but it's an attempt to deal with life. And I think when it does escalate to things like, substance use, which can then, as you rightly say, become quite problematic, it's that often they might be providing some kind of, relief for the person, or they could be some sort of an attempt to cope, and maybe even with just fitting in, right? Or something. And so when we understand that, like, can I kind of really understand why the person is behaving in this behavior, with what's going on. But I pulled out your book as you were talking, because there was this quote, and the quote is where you said, there is no way to make people change. You can only make them feel less intimidated by it, And so again, as you say, this idea of fixing is that, so while all that's going on, and there can be sort of that openness, to allowing natural consequences, and so on, is an opening up conversation. But then, recognizing, can I provide some guidance about how this might not be the best behavior, but maybe changing feels a little intimidating for you, and that's the part I can help you with.
Right.
By supporting. Yeah.
And being willing to dialogue. Being, one of the most common questions is parents don't know or are struggling with how to communicate to their teen about substances. And the reality is that this has to happen way, 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 way back. So we need to be having age-appropriate conversations about substance use, what's acceptable in the home and what's not, what's acceptable while they're living in the home, mom and dad's experience with substances, having open dialogue so that the teen knows what to expect. And that's where the boundaries are and the healthy limits are already established. So often when families come to me, they haven't had those things established. That's okay. We can start, but they're even less familiar with setting boundaries. And whereas, this is the difficulty parents have. There aren't a lot of manuals out there for raising teens that are going through mental health and addictions. Yet we have more and more teens that are identifying as having difficulties. So that's one reason that I provided my guide, was I really felt that it was needed. And the other books that were in the marketplace were my colleagues. So I'd already read those ones. And it's really needed. Parents don't get a lot of direction about this stage and what's normal and what's not. It's not black or white. It's not all substance or no substance. There's a dialectic here. There's a middle path to be discovered with both parties, the parent, caregiver, and the teen. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. In fact, let's dig into that a little bit more. And I'm not sure, maybe you can tell me which you prefer to address first, but this idea of boundaries. I think people really appreciate when they hear a little bit more about, like, okay, boundaries. We hear about boundaries and we're supposed to have good boundaries. And I don't even know what a boundary is. And I don't know how to make one. And whenever I've tried, I've failed dismally, usually because I'm the first one to be pulling it back down because I get frightened of holding it. So perhaps boundaries and then natural consequences, being allowing that to happen. Maybe tell us a bit more about that. Yeah.
So I don't know what comes first, but I think that we all have boundaries. We just may not talk about them. So how and boundaries can be seen also as healthy limits.
Right.
They're not walls, they're not barriers. They're a point at which I say, this is okay for me, this is comfortable for me,
Yeah.
and this is not. And so they need to be communicated. And young people do thrive when they have structure and discipline. Of course, they rally against it. They push against it. That is the stage of development that they're in. So you can expect that. You're not going to be, parenting is not about being popular. It's about providing the skills and tools required so that your young person can launch and can thrive and can function outside in the world.
Yeah.
So the more that your home doesn't reflect what happens outside in the world, the bigger that gap's going to be, and the more shocking it's going to be for young people to step outside of that.
Wow.
So that's where allowing natural consequences, and again, it's not black and white. So consequences are not punishment. And a lot of parents will come to me and say, well, I don't believe in punishing my child. And it's punishing is just going to shame and blame. And shame is not the solution. Shame is the problem.
Sure.
So we need to address communication with openness and no judgment and no blame and talking about it. Like here, for example, our household shuts down at 11 o'clock. Dad and I, or mom and I, need to go to work tomorrow, and your brother and your sister are going to school. So we need the household to shut down at a certain time. That means Wi-Fi is off and devices are out of the rooms, whatever your healthy limits are. So is it understandable that the doors are going to be locked at 11? So if you're not home, that's going to be a big problem. Having those discussions around kind of curfew or something, and these don't have to be, you're not necessarily having the substance use discussion right away. You're looking at the lowest hanging fruit, the simple things, like if you're not ready at 8:30 when I said I'd give you a ride to school, I'm not waiting. And to hold true to that, to follow through. And parents need to practice following through, just like teens need to understand that there are going to be healthy limits. So that's a bit of the boundary, a quick boundary.
That's great.
Natural
I love
consequence.
that. I think you need to come and teach the boundaries class at within our network, because and it's funny, Susan, what I heard you say is, if you, I will. We really try to help people understand. I always love Robert Frost's poem, The Mending Wall, where this idea of the line in there, fences make good neighbors, and only because what it does is it the boundary is there to help us get along, not to divide us, but so that you don't come trample on my petunias, or I go have a barbecue in your backyard. It's just like, I know where I end and you begin, and the boundary facilitates a more healthy relationship. And also, I love what you were saying about how parents have the right to say, this house shuts down, at 11 o'clock. Is that's how it works here. And we're communicating that to you. So if you, are not back by 11, the door will be locked. I will be locking the door at 11. It's like, it's not an ultimatum. It's a very, it's nice of me to be communicating to you, this is how things are going to work, and as well as, these are the situations that are no longer tenable for me. So if you behave a certain way, I will be doing this. Not like, you will not be allowed to behave that way. Recognizing, you know what, I can't control you. That quote again of yours, there's no way to make people change. We can just kind of make them less afraid of it. And we pave the way as well with our own role modeling when we go, this is in this situation, here is what I am going to be doing. And that boundary is communicating my behavior or maybe my change in behavior, because I haven't been doing that up to now. I've been,
and
that
parents
awful word
can
enabling.
They can take ownership for that and say, I'm really sorry we didn't have this conversation last year. That's on me. I'm your parent. I'm responsible for setting limits and guidelines. Here's the thing. Tomorrow's a new day, and this is what we're going to be doing. And expect them to push back and be willing to hold your healthy limit, because your limit is about what's best for you, and you're not trying to educate or manipulate your teen. You're trying to do what's best for you and the common welfare of the household. So what's the alternative? If the teen comes home at midnight, there was no communication about the expectation, perhaps the door's locked, they're banging on the door, there's going to be a conflict, there's going to be a fight, and then that becomes the natural consequence, which is not what we want. It's not a natural consequence, really. It's a consequence that could have been avoided if we had set the limit in the first place. So this is hard stuff, and it's hard to go back in time, but you can always just start from today. And start with something small.
And
practice.
So now we're understanding that natural consequences. Thank you. That's a great example, because it is the consequence of, every action has a equal and equivalent, reaction, or whatever that expression is.
Yes. And with a teen, it's always going to be bigger, because they're teens and they're developing.
Yes.
And we need
I love how you said, no, please carry on. Yeah.
The other thing that limits and boundaries provide is the teen is going to push up against it. Then they're going to need to learn how to regulate their emotions, because they're upset, because they're not getting what they want. And that's the lesson that teens need to learn, is that they're not always going to get their way. The real world is not always going to cave to their every whim. And it helps them learn that emotional regulation. So The Anxious Generation, popular book right now, it's about this. Kids don't have that framework of managing their own emotions. So there's a lot more anxiety, because we've lived in post 9/11, post Second World War, even a more permissive parenting style.
No, absolutely. So I love what you're saying about stop being mad about how they're going to respond. Like, that's probably how they're going to respond. Like, instead, focus on holding your boundary, and expect them to push back. Don't be mad when they do.
Absolutely expect them, and don't take it personally. It's not about you. It's about the teen learning to manage their own emotional dysregulation, their own I don't want to be too clinical, but their own emotions, just learning to deal with their feelings. Because if we don't deal with feelings, feelings deal with us. And certainly as a teen, that's what happened to me. I kept everything stuffed in. I ended up with a disease at the age of 14 before using substances, because I stuffed everything. And then I learned to cope by taking drugs and alcohol and having an eating disorder. So if we don't deal with our feelings are really going to come out and deal with us in a more serious way, with a more serious consequence.
Well, thank you for that, powerful personal example, or reference. And I honestly do think it's what makes you so people are always willing to listen to you. I know, the amazing feedback we certainly get from, clients that are lucky to be in your care is just your lived experience, and so what you're saying is not coming from a place of judgment. It's like, oh man, I've walked in your shoes. I understand what you're going through. No judgment here, but like, again, my experience has taught me that it really doesn't work in the end. That is how I try to cope. It seems like the easier, softer way, but not necessarily.
But not necessarily the long road in the end. So
well, tell me, Yeah, tell me a little bit about, talking about conversations. So we've talked about boundaries, and I think honestly, that's powerful role modeling. I love what you said about I may not have been doing it this way till now, but tomorrow's a new day. Is I get to show you that I haven't been perfect either, but man, I'm trying, and I think there's a power in that. And I love what you're saying about what better place for them to learn about emotion regulation and so on, where people aren't going to put up with stuff than in the home. How else might we try to encourage discussions, with our kids when we notice, like, I don't think you seem to be doing so well. So apart from setting boundaries, how can we get them to try to open up and talk? We know how difficult that is with teens at times.
Yeah. Well, it's don't chase them into their bedroom or a private space. They need space. So try and you can create the situation, but then try to make it feel organic. So I need to go run some errands, come along, or on the drive to school, or on if you're accompanying them somewhere. So it's not, and you can sandwich something between a couple of affirmations of what they're doing well, like catch your team doing something really excellent, really good for them.
Sure.
And then say, or later on say, what do you think about this? I'm curious.
Yeah.
I've been reading a lot about teens and substance use. What
Yeah.
are your thoughts on that? What are your friends doing? And don't pepper them with too many questions. Really listen to what they say. And
Yeah.
if they shut down, you could even inquire further, like, oh, it sounds like maybe I've overstepped and you're shutting down. Is that true? Is that right?
Yeah.
Can you tell me about what you're feeling right now? So open-ended questions are
Nice.
fantastic because they're not a yes or no. And we know that teens love to often not say very much at all. So they would, how was your day? Fine. No, what happened? What was the most interesting thing that happened for you today?
Yeah.
So that's the open-ended question.
Yeah.
And it works too around being curious. So when we're curious, we're not in the emotional part of our brain. We're in our prefrontal cortex. When we have a motive and an agenda, the teen definitely feels it.
Yeah.
So they feel like they may not communicate their feelings, but
Yeah.
they are so intuitive and they are really reading the temperature of the room. They know when mom's pissed off. They know when
Yeah.
dad is upset. And that's okay, but don't think that they don't know.
Yeah.
It's
Right.
they are really absorbing a lot
Yeah.
without communicating that they're absorbing
Yeah.
a lot.
Yeah.
So
That's so helpful. Honestly, it is. Again, what I'm taking from what you're saying is like, don't we all respond well to, even in the workplace or somewhere, when somebody is going, you really did a good job on X. Before they're just constantly telling us about where we're screwing up and what we've done wrong. Like, that doesn't make us walk away feeling great about ourselves. And when we don't feel great about ourselves and we start to have thoughts that maybe I'm just an arsehole, and and so just the power of, we can always find something positive to say. And if we know how well that affects us, when people do that with us, that naturally that's going to be good for our teens. Yeah. And the open-ended way of just like, knowing you've sensed my emotions walking into the room before me, before I even came in.
yeah.
And so let me not pretend I don't, but let me just have the humility to try and be as authentic as possible, and just go, I'm trying to read up on this stuff. And, like, what are your thoughts on this?
Bring something
I'm
up.
learning here too.
Yeah, I went to book club and so was talking about their son and they're involved with marijuana. Like, tell me about you. What's that like for you? And to really be curious about what's happening and have and also say more about that. Tell me more about that. When they do open up, you really want to encourage them talking and you will hear change talk. And that brings us to kind of the stages of change. But when you hear change talk, that's
Okay.
really important. And if you can elicit change talk from your teen, something that they're thinking about doing, maybe related to substances, maybe related to better well-being habits like exercise or eating habits or exercise or sleep, if
Okay.
it's so encouraging change talk.
Okay.
And so there's a lot that parents have to keep in check before
Yeah.
they can really get to that point. And that
Yeah.
self-care for them and dealing with their own feelings, their own sense of blaming themselves for the
Yeah.
situation or guilt. Most parents that come to me feel guilt and remorse. And if they can even articulate that, we've made progress because
Mm,
it's not their fault and they feel like it is. So they
mm.
really need to deal with those feelings before they come into trying to connect with their teen. And I
Why
like
do
to
you think
say,
they blame themselves so much, Susan? I mean, what is that about? Because I understand there's that sort of tendency of I am all powerful and I have raised these children, but one child's responding a certain way and the other one's fine. Like, so why the immediate blame? It must be me that
I
did
think that
this.
it's quite natural for people to personalize behavior. And so
Mm-hmm.
again, looking at disorder, your child is not their disorder. They're experiencing certain behaviors and symptoms.
Right.
And so you are not the cause of that
Yeah.
disorder. To separate your teen from their behavior and to also separate yourself from their behavior and their disorder. You didn't cause it. You can't cure it. Sure, you're a part of it. And
Mm-hmm.
looking at what part you play in it is important, but you're not to blame. And you have to feel the guilt and do the right thing anyways. If you're waiting for all of your guilt to be assuaged, you're going to be waiting forever.
Right,
I've learned
right.
that you feel the guilt and you try to do the right thing anyways for
Right.
your
That's great.
situation.
Yeah, I love that. All right, I wanted to maybe zoom out a little bit because we've sort of been inside there with the family, like, really understanding that struggle and sort of even just the dynamics, like who's struggling, who's to blame, boundaries. But we know that like we've seen teen mental health and substance use rising,
Mhm.
which is obviously, very concerning. And what do you think has changed in the past, decade to make this more challenging for families?
Yeah, well, it's definitely more accessible. And we're talking
Sure.
from the general Toronto, Ontario area, but we know
Yep.
that drugs are much more accessible. And the internet and easy access by way of apps and things of that nature are really making it
Mhm.
much more accessible. So that's a big factor. The other
Yeah.
thing is with the talk of regulating and legalizing and understanding all of that as
Yeah.
the perception of harm decreases. So when we think, oh, marijuana is not a problem because it's legal, the risk
Oh,
always increases. So the
right.
perception of harm reduces, and therefore people tend to think it's not as serious. Now, that's not necessarily the case with every drug, and we know what happened in the opiate epidemic, how some of the drugs were coming into the marketplace, but now, we're seeing a whole other thing. So we also are living in a time where there's surveillance parenting,
Mm-hmm.
where that's a big difference, knowing where your loved one is all of the time, and I'm not sure that that's a healthy thing. So,
Mm-hmm.
or depending on how we use it, I should say, it's a
Sure.
tool,
Sure.
and depending how we use it, that's
Yeah.
I don't think that's causal in effect, but it is a
A
factor,
change, and
a
definitely a
change.
change in society for sure.
And we're living in a more permissive parenting culture. So that again, that's not the cause, but it has an impact on how kids are raised and with what limits boundaries. So if they're not, like I said, when we talked about the backfiring, if there weren't boundaries and limits, they're going to keep trying higher risk things if there's no consequence for trying the lower risk things. So if there's no
Mm.
consequence happening, then they're not going to see that it's lethal or they're not going to see
Mm.
that it's dangerous. So we used to say marijuana was a gateway drug. I think we still do. But right now, if sometimes the first exposure is your
Mm.
parents' medicine cabinet, where young people might be finding something. So we have to look at the whole,
Yeah.
again, step back, look at the whole
access.
situation.
Yeah.
And then with the mental health anxiety, yeah, I mean, Anxious Generation talks a lot about the factors and post 9/11 world where we were all much more afraid of things happening. So we were much more cautious and much more ready, being prepared, ready for any catastrophe. I apologize. There's some landscaping going on outside, so I don't know if that's
Oh, we can't hear
distracting.
a thing.
Good.
Oh, yeah. Nothing on our end. No
That's
worries.
good.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, those are some of the influences.
Sure.
And we know with the internet and kids
Yeah.
going into their room with a cell phone at night, I mean, that's a pretty dangerous prospect, given what happens in some of these apps and some of these video games. So that's important to be following.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, it is for sure a changing landscape, and we see just in society generally, with youth perhaps being somewhat more disillusioned with what they can control and what they can't. You talk about 9/11, and then there's COVID. It's like, my gosh, living with this unpredictability, or being really disenfranchised with what they see going on politically that they may not agree with. And this is the leadership, that they are trying. So, all of that, right? These greater cultural factors.
Absolutely.
Societal.
Addiction is, as we know, it's a biopsychosocial model. So all of these things are impacting a teen as they're developing, and their brain is developing too. And they're in this adolescence, which is a period of flux and change, and they're supposed to be engaged in riskier behavior because that's the developmental stage they're at. And that's why they need us to provide those guardrails so that they hit them rather than falling into something more risky or dangerous, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't know if you've ever heard yourself saying this, but I know I have, which is just this idea of, thank goodness I didn't grow up, with a cell phone in my pocket and access to every single piece of news, good or bad or socially pressurizing, and how do you put up guardrails, around those things, just talking about, what has changed. And it's like how really difficult that I see how difficult that is to manage, when I'm sort of, I should be, writing right now or doing this or whatever, and instead I'm doom scrolling, it's like, we know this is not easy, and so really,
the fact that we have common knowledge of doom scrolling says a lot, doesn't it?
Sure.
And parents are under pressure like never before, I believe, and I think teens are under pressure like never before. So we have lots of tools with technology and with AI, and we still need perhaps stronger family values and family rules and family expectations in lieu of all of these other outside influences. So, and I'm not suggesting a punitive parenting at all, but parenting with allowing a certain amount of struggle. We learn when we struggle. We learn when in my addiction experience, I learned by hitting a bottom and then coming back up. I learned to manage my own emotions. I learned to manage my own life. So we learn, we can't learn without a struggle.
Right.
So we need to be willing to let our loved ones hit some form of discomfort before we intervene. And we're always there and communicate that we're always here. And you'll always have a phone to communicate with us. And you'll always have, we'll always be there to support you emotionally. It doesn't mean that we're going to be, emotionally abused during your period of experimentation or whatever your phase of whatever, but we're always
back to the boundaries.
Back to the boundaries. And boundaries are consequences are compassionate. They're not punitive. I see consequences as compassionate. So we have to step back ourselves and understand that it's teaching our teens something, their experience, their mistakes, their failing their way forward. They have to fail their way forward. And we're there to ensure that they're somehow moving forward.
That's right. There's a wonderful talk by Brene Brown. I think, she was being interviewed by Russell Brand or something, when she talked about compassion, and this idea that, in doing tons and tons of research around what it is, and what do compassionate people look like, and what do they score the most highly in, thinking mistakenly that would be empathetic natures. And what they found is that oh my God, they are boundaried beyond belief. And sort of then kind of went back to say to them, what is this all about? And it's the fact that I can afford to be that open-hearted and available to you because I do not brook abuse from people. And so I can afford to be that open-hearted because I have the skills and tools to shut the gates when you think you can overstep.
Because
so
I put my
love
own
that.
well-being first.
Yes.
And I encourage parents to, as much as there is this notion that we're only as happy as our most miserable child.
Right.
It's really important to put your oxygen mask on first so that you can then take care of the other.
Sure.
So
Well, I'm
putting
hearing
your
a
own
lot of
well-being
that.
first.
Yeah, I hear so much of that from what you're saying, Susan, is this idea of, it's about you looking at your own behavior. We're talking about doom scrolling. We're talking about this, and where you want to be present and available and to be listening. So maybe the first thing that changes is my own behavior around that, and me taking care of, my side of the streets. And then immediately that does make me, more available. So where does the work happen is with me.
And you're modeling it to your team. So when you go out for a run, or when you go to book club, or when you go to a recovery meeting in the community, you're modeling that to your teenagers. So many people reach out to me for support, and I'll ask, are you letting your teen know that you're talking to a professional? Oh, no, I'm in the car while my teen is in the house playing video games because I don't have privacy in my home. Like, there's an imbalance there. That will be where we'll start. So what would it look like to tell them that, this is beyond your scope as a parent, and so you're asking for some support? Why are you not telling them? Like, be a little more transparent about, this is a struggle for me too, and humility. Humility is a wonderful thing to model to your teen. I'm not perfect as a parent. I'm not trying to be perfect. It is. So seeking help is you're modeling that to your children too.
Very cool. So, I mean, Susan, you've been your company, Sustainable Recovery. You've been helping families and working with teens for over 20 years now. Is there any particular story that stands out for you?
There's so many stories.
Oh, I imagine.
There are so many stories. And so not one in particular, but I've had the great fortune of having clients come back and check in with me a decade later and let me know where they're at, or sometimes they come back and want some more support because perhaps abstinence is, they're exploring something of a different nature. And I love that. I love that they have learned. It's unrealistic to think that we can preach abstinence to a teenager. They can certainly take breaks and they can certainly be abstinent. That does happen. But to introduce them to a way of coping and a way of dealing with life on life's terms, I think that's the greatest gift. And it's a gift that I didn't, for whatever reasons, I didn't have access to. So it's tremendously healing to see. And to be able to carry a message of, this path is here for you if you so choose. And sometimes it's the parent that gets recovery and not the teen. And that's okay too. Like, people have the right to do things wrong. People have the right to do life as they choose to do it. And how, so there's so many stories, and even the stories when there's a fatality or harm involved, they kind of redouble my efforts to put myself more into what I can control and what I can change. And they're reminders that this disease of addiction does kill, and it does harm a lot of people. And that if we can all just do what we can, that's where we can be effective. So well, I love my work. I'm passionate about it, and I'm always optimistic and always hopeful. Recovery is always possible, and there's so many paths to recovery.
Sure. And I love what you were saying about that they come back to you. It's interesting because we were running a kind of advisory committee conversation recently. And, even with regard to the military or veteran community, and we received such important feedback from our alumni to say, You know, when people relapse, they don't want to come back, even though that might be funded by the government, you know, to say, we understand this, you know, these are chronic conditions, and relapse is that trans-theoretical model of change is sometimes a part of the journey. How do you learn from that? How do they, and the fact that they come back to you and they go, I'm in trouble again, this is what's happened, but that they do that is so powerful, that they learned from you that they should, if that happens, that it's not again that thing of shame,
It's
right?
not,
Is that don't let the shame stop you from getting back up off your knees if you should fall down, and just how hard that can be. That self-judgment creeps in, you know, with people, unless we prepare them to know that this may happen, and you know, not that we're saying it should happen, but if it does happen, you know,
and
that
sometimes it's
come
more
back.
matter of fact, like, okay, your behavior is telling us you need a higher level of support. Let's get you a higher level of support.
Right, right.
If you're relapsing, it's not, it's just matter of fact.
Yeah, let's meet you where you're
falling
at.
off your crutches, you might need another assistive device. So
Yes.
it's just kind of like dealing with the facts. Let's leave the shame and blame and out of it.
Yeah. Okay, so I know we will want to go to questions. So there was just I guess the last thing I wanted to ask you, and then sort of have the members participating in the webinar today get a chance as well, was just like, for any parent who is listening and, you know, and is just terrified, you know, what would you say would be the first step that you would want them to take?
If they're terrified, do something well, they're acknowledging that they're terrified, which is great. They have the awareness of that. Talk to someone, share with someone. What if you don't have a professional yet, contact an organization and get some support. It's okay. And to, you know, just be willing. Just be willing to embark on a journey to be less terrified every day. Connecting with their teen. You don't want to bring that terrified feeling to your teenager, because again, they are really connected to you neurobiologically, but you deserve to bring that terrified feeling somewhere and to share it, and to get some relief yourself for it.
Wow, very powerful, Susan. And I think I've sort of felt that thread throughout this webinar today, this idea, you know, of if you're terrified, your first instinct was to go deal with that feeling that you're feeling, and get the supports you need, because we have to steady ourselves, you know. I wanted to end, you know, because as we were talking, and again, I just heard this refrain that you were saying, it's about, you know, we have to trust what's going on, and we have to be taking care of ourselves, and we have to be available for others. Because I always used to, it struck me once and it never left me, this expression Wayne Dyer used to use about the things we love, we need to learn to leave alone. And it seemed so impossible to me when, as a single mother raising a young, you know, child, I was like, what are you talking about? You know, leave it alone. And I dug it out, and I realized it was actually a poem from Naomi Long Madgett. So I'm going to just quickly end with that, and then I'm going to hand over to Jonathan. I wouldn't coax the plant if I were you. Such watchful nursing may do it harm. Let the soil rest from so much digging, and wait until it's dry before you water it. The leaf's inclined to find its own direction. Give it a chance to seek the sunlight for itself. Much growth is stunted by too careful prodding, too eager tenderness. The things we love, we have to learn to leave alone. Very difficult, very powerful. But thank you so much.
And let me just add that
wisdom.
I overwater my plants all the time. I'm just in there doing too much, over efforting, and I can learn a lot from that poem myself.
Yeah. Well, thank you. So
thank you, Colette.
Thank you, Susan. I could do this all day long. So Jonathan, I guess I will invite you to come back in and see if we can give the participants a chance to have some answering.
That's awesome. And before we even get there, that was fabulous. Every time I hear Colette, you or Susan chat, I learn so much. So first, thank you so much. That was awesome. We have some questions, and for anyone in the audience who has some other questions, feel free to drop them in the Q&A or the chat. I'll keep track as we're going through for the next 10 minutes. But our first question comes from Sam. In the case of teens who have been through multiple treatments or clinicians, is there something that you find would be helpful to support that teen and creating trust with them after negative experiences or feeling like nothing works?
I would say, what was it? What worked for you and what didn't work for you? What was it about, and what do you think that you would benefit from now? So I don't know if this is a clinical person or a family member, but you can frame the answer similarly. They've got a lot of experience, so let's hear from some of that experience. Is it to ask them about that? What did they learn? What did they like? What didn't they like? What did they respond to? What modalities did they use? Is there anything they're interested in? Be really curious about their experience. They've got lots of it.
I love that. And I think it's really interesting I think when we hear it from teens, you kind of might take it immediately as some kind of resistant or challenging question. When you say, sounds like you've had some challenges, I'd love to hear everything about that.
Yeah.
Is really, really great. Our next question comes from Chris. Can you comment on campus drinking culture? It seems most parents downplay it and almost chuckle about it, but it seems to be a breeding ground for an alcohol use disorder. I guess like to just add to that, like how do you prepare for those kind of transitions where, somebody might be getting their first taste of that
Freedom.
that's autonomy, freedom for living on campus.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of things out there on campus that aren't necessarily safe or healthy in that way.
Yeah. So again, having the family values conversation or understanding of this might happen out there in our culture, in society, and it's not what we do. It's not what our family does. It's not what sort of the expectation. We're certainly not going to finance that kind of behavior. So looking at that, maybe you provide gift cards instead of cash. Like to acknowledge that it happens out there. And you're absolutely right in the question that society does downplay it. And that's not a good thing. And why does society downplay it? Well, because people like relief and reward and they like to drink and use themselves. So they want to see it as very, very normal. There's also a great population out there that doesn't use substances and that isn't binge using, even if the culture or the dominant percentage is.
Thanks so much for that, Susan. We have another question from Sarah, and I think there's two questions from Sarah. First, the in quotes, if you blank, I will blank. Can you give me an example of that isn't leading toward bribery? I have a hard time with this one. And actually, Sam, I saw you put a great answer in the chat as well. But Susan, or Colette too. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
If you blank, I will blank.
Yeah.
Is that, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the framing is a little bit ultimatumy. But here's what I'm going to do. If and when this happens, if this happens, I'm gonna, which I guess is similar, but it wouldn't say it in quite the same way. If this home is substance free, if you bring substances into the home, there will be consequences. Is that did I fill in the blanks? Colette?
Yeah, and it is tricky, Susan, because it takes a lot of working to go, hang on a second, the behavior that I can control is only my own, nobody else's. I would love for theirs to change, but really I can only tell them how mine will change. And so, I'm trying to think of an example with a teenager, but it's like, if somebody's going to come in, if you come in and you're starting to break all the furniture in the house, I will call the police. If you are going to scream and shout, I will take the kids and I will go to my mother's house. I can't change what you're going to be doing, but it's kind of describing a behavior that's no longer okay for me.
Yeah.
And saying, if you describe behavior, I will be behaving this way from now
Mhm.
on. And I loved what you had said earlier, is like, I might not have been doing that till now, but moving
We're
forward,
starting now. Yeah.
I will be doing X, right?
Yeah.
And the reason boundaries are so important is because, I always use that example about I will call the police, because, I can hear, even some parents or myself thinking, I would never do that, like I'm not going to escalate it to that point, in which case then don't say that.
Then don't say it. Yeah,
Don't
because you
say that.
lose all
Yeah,
credibility.
all credibility is
And
that
it's worse to lose
somebody else's
credibility.
boundary, yeah, is not your boundary. Like
Yeah.
how somebody else might
Yeah.
choose to behave to deal with that situation, depending on
Mhm.
how long they've been trying to deal with this, what else they've tried. Their boundary would be different to yours. And so boundaries are deeply personal and need to be held. So if you don't think you're going to hold that, please, goodness, don't say
Yeah.
it.
Don't say
Yeah.
it yet.
Yeah.
Don't say it yet.
Yeah.
Well,
Practice first.
that's great. Another question from Sarah, and then we have Katie. Thanks so much for all these awesome questions. We have just a few minutes left. From Sarah, how can addiction be dealt with in respect to someone with BPD or borderline personality disorder? What do you suggest, especially when it's used as a coping mechanism?
I ticked a lot of boxes when I was in active addiction, one of them probably being BPD. So I don't, diagnosis is how we're responding to a diagnosis is important too. That it's not a scarlet letter. It's not just you just work on what they're willing to work on. And yet, sure, everything is a matter of coping. We're all coping with something, but now we have two problems, because if we're coping with BPD with substances, now we've got, concurrent disorders happening. So it's not sustainable. So we want to look for sustainable solutions, tools, support. And you're right, there's so often concurrent diagnoses, many things happening at the same time. And a lot of them will shift when abstinence is a choice. And if it doesn't mean they'll go away, but there will be a change when abstinence, when a break from substances is taken.
I just want to jump in on that, because I think what you're saying is so important. And it comes back to Susan, is like sometimes the substance use or cutting or whatever the behavior is, that self-harming behavior that I'm engaging in, which just seems so ludicrous, to somebody who doesn't understand it, is my best way of coping. It's the only way that I know how to deal with my pain or my anxiety. And I know you talk a little bit about that in the book. And so often I'm really, trying to deal with underlying conditions. But as you say, substance use disorder, can often just be the runaway horse, that takes on a life of its own. And until we get that under control, we don't know whether is it anxiety that's fueling it. Is it symptoms of BPD, which are these attachments are difficult for me, and I love too what you say about let's get rid of the goddamn scarlet letters, okay? Like enough. With the stigmatization around labels, because honestly, I saw again a presentation where somebody was going, what used to present as bipolar disorder then became, BPD, then became PTSD, then became, ADHD. And that if you look at the DSM-5 and you look at a lot of the presenting symptoms, there's so much overlap.
So much overlap. So it's not the diagnosis, it's the response to the diagnosis.
That's
it's
right.
The treatment planning around the diagnosis that is key.
That is key. Yeah.
So that's awesome. And we have one last question, and then we're almost at time, and it's from Katie. In regard to younger teens, how do you determine what are age appropriate levels of freedom?
Yeah, those are great questions. Talking to other parents, super helpful. It doesn't have to be in a substance use identified group, but talking to other parents and talking to partners and talking to the other family members. How were you raised? How was I raised? What are our family values? What are we okay with? And then monitoring that and having some guidelines, and maybe everything's negotiable, everything's amendable. Just having it start with you, and and rather than what's normal out there, because there's a lot of abnormal out there, probably more and more abnormal out there. So we really want to have stronger foundations, and when things are crazy in the world, we need to ground more. So maybe keeping it simpler and having those age appropriate discussions. What does your team think is normal? What do you think is normal? And then finding a middle path. And also, it's your house, it's your home, you're the adult, they're the child. So utilize that.
I love that. Well, Susan, Colette, this was absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much. And to everyone who joined, we will be sending a follow-up email the next week. And we're really, really excited to see you next time as well. Have a great day. And,
Thanks, Jonathan.
Thanks,
And
everyone.
Susan, thank you so, so much for your wisdom
Thanks,
today.
Colette and Jonathan and Jennifer in the background and all the attendees.
Yes.
yes.
To
Right,
all out
bye
there.
now.
Take care.